My husband ordered me to apologize to his female best friend because my honesty hurt her feelings. When I refused, he yelled, "Apologize or I'll divorce you." I went to her house and my words ended them both. Can you imagine looking into the eyes of the man you married, the man you loved, and hearing him coldly declare, "Apologize to Scarlett or I'm divorcing you"? My blood ran cold because the Scarlett he demanded I grovel to? She was his secret, years-long emotional affair partner. He delivered that ultimatum like he was closing a business deal, not threatening to end our 5-year marriage. His face was set in that familiar, infuriating expression. The one that told me I was being unreasonable, jealous, impossible. The one that, for months, had chipped away at my sanity, even when a voice deep inside screamed that I was right. I just stared at him. This man I'd promised to love and cherish, this stranger across from me. It hit me then, I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe I'd never truly known him at all. The Mason I thought I married wouldn't demand an apology for me noticing his inappropriate bond with his best friend. The Mason I knew wouldn't gaslight me into believing I was the problem, all while his emotional affair with Scarlett Pierce had been festering right under my nose for years. My voice came out shockingly calm. "You want me to apologize to her? For what exactly?" His voice rose with furious indignation as if he were the victim here. "For treating her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. For making her feel unwelcome in our lives. For being so jealous you can't accept I have a meaningful friendship outside our marriage." He paused, taking a breath. "Scarlett's been nothing but kind to you, Arya. You've hurt her feelings with your constant attitude. She deserves an apology. And if you can't give her that, then I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Something clicked inside me then. Not heartbreak, not yet anyway. That would come. What I felt was a sudden, chilling clarity. Like a razor's edge. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand that moment, you need to go back. Back to when I still believed in Mason, in us, in the life we were building together. My name is Arya Montgomery, and for 5 glorious years, I truly believed I had a solid marriage. We met at a summer barbecue, one of those perfect July afternoons where the air hums with possibility. Mason, tall and charming, was by the drink cooler. He looked at me with this genuine, easy smile, and all my plans to play it cool evaporated. We talked for 3 hours straight, sitting on the back porch, the party swirling around us. He listened when I spoke about my graphic design work, asking insightful questions about my creative process. He talked about his logistics company with real enthusiasm, not that feigned interest some guys use as a placeholder. But what truly got me? His attention to detail. Our first real date, he remembered my coffee order. Splash of cream, no sugar. He surprised me with bookstore dates because I'd mentioned loving the scent of new books. He made me feel seen, truly seen, like he was interested in who I was, not just who he wanted me to be. Our wedding followed 2 years later. Small, intimate, meaningful. A garden venue, string lights woven through ancient oak trees, wildflowers in mason jars on every table. Only our closest family and friends were there. Mason cried during his vows. My mom whispered at the reception, "I've never seen you happier." We settled into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I worked from home. Mason commuted. We split bills, cooked together, dreaming of a house, kids, more travel. Life felt stable, predictable, comfortable. Everything I'd been taught to value. I thought I knew exactly who I'd married, precisely what our future held. But looking back now, it's clear. I was living in a carefully constructed illusion, only seeing what Mason wanted me to see. That illusion started to crack about 6 months into our marriage. Mason came home one evening, practically buzzing with excitement. He sat me down, beaming, to tell me his college best friend Scarlett was moving back to town. She'd been in pharmaceutical sales out of state for years. He spoke of her with this nostalgic warmth, a tone that seemed innocent enough at first. "Scarlett's brilliant," he gushed. "Naturally charismatic, could sell anything to anyone." He recounted their college days, late nights solving the world's problems, promises of forever. I was genuinely happy for him. Everyone needs good friends, especially those who knew you before you became you. I had my own college friends scattered across the country. I thought, great. This will be good for him. He'd been feeling disconnected, missing that easy camaraderie. When I finally met Scarlett at a downtown restaurant, she was exactly as Mason described. Polished, confident. Highlighted hair, tasteful jewelry, professionally dressed even for a casual Friday. She had that practiced client meeting smile, warm, but slightly impersonal, making you feel welcomed but not truly seen. She clearly invested in her appearance, a walking professional brand. But what really struck me was how effortlessly Scarlett and Mason fell into their rhythm. They laughed about professors I'd never met, reminisced about road trips I wasn't on, finished each other's sentences. Deep familiarity. I sat there, smiling, nodding, trying to interject, but mostly I felt like an outsider watching a reunion I wasn't part of. It wasn't hostile, just exclusive. Their shared history was a language I didn't speak. Inside jokes, references I couldn't grasp. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there too, a quiet accountant. He seemed just as peripheral. At one point, as Mason and Scarlett dissolved into laughter over some sophomore year memory, Elijah caught my eye. We exchanged a brief glance. I didn't understand it then, but later, I'd recognize it as a mutual acknowledgement of our secondary status. We were both on the sidelines. The first tiny boundary violation happened so subtly I almost missed it. A few weeks after that dinner, Scarlett started texting Mason during our date nights. We were at the movies waiting for previews. His phone buzzed. He glanced, typed a quick reply, apologized with a smile. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then again. By the time the movie started, he'd exchanged a dozen messages about Scarlett's work presentation. He'd apologize each time, promising to put it away, but his attention kept snapping back to his phone, like a magnetic force. This became our new normal. Dinner dates interrupted. Weekend plans derailed by Scarlett's marriage problems. Late evenings, Mason glued to his screen while we supposedly watched TV. Each time I gently suggested, maybe you can text her back later, he'd look at me with barely concealed disappointment. Like I was failing some fundamental test of empathy. Then came the spare key. Mason gave Scarlett a key to our apartment for emergencies, without ever discussing it with me. I found out one Tuesday afternoon walking out of my home office, to find Scarlett sprawled on our couch, shoes off, completely at home while Mason made her coffee. "Oh, my Wi-Fi went down again," she chirped as if this was a recurring, well-known event. I stood there in my own living room feeling like an intruder listening to her chat with Mason about sales territories. When she finally left, I asked Mason if we could set some boundaries. Maybe a text before she just walked in? His response was instant, defensive. "Scarlett's going through a difficult transition," he said with exaggerated patience. "New city, struggling marriage, high-pressure job. Real friends show up without conditions, Arya. Are you really going to prioritize convenience over compassion?" That conversation became the template. Every time I tried to draw a line, Mason twisted it. I was unwelcoming, jealous, unable to handle his friendships. Slowly, agonizingly, I started second-guessing myself. Was I possessive? Unreasonable? Maybe this was what mature, adult friendships looked like and I was just too insecure to get it. Our 5th anniversary. Late September. I'd booked Meridian, an elegant downtown restaurant, 2 months in advance. I wore the emerald dress Mason had once said made my eyes like sea glass. I'd planned every detail. Dinner, a walk along the river walk, then home to a surprise gift, a leather-bound photo album chronicling our journey. We were halfway through appetizers when his phone started buzzing. Once, twice, 5 times in rapid succession. Each buzz chipped away at his presence until he was barely there. His eyes were glued to the screen. I watched myself become invisible. "Mason," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper, "it's our anniversary." He looked up, genuinely confused. "Scarlett's having a crisis," he explained. "I'm just letting her know she's not alone." But I was alone. Sitting across from my husband on what should have been one of our most special nights, while he poured emotional support into another woman. The irony was suffocating, bitter in my mouth. Later that night, lying beside Mason as he slept soundly, I finally admitted the crushing truth. My marriage had 3 people in it. And I was the least important one. 3 months dragged by after that anniversary disaster. 3 months of me desperately trying to convince myself I was overreacting. That Mason and Scarlett's bond was just an unusually close friendship. That my discomfort was my problem to fix. 3 months of swallowing my instincts, forcing smiles as Scarlett continued to use her spare key for unannounced drop-ins, and Mason kept prioritizing her texts over our conversations. Then one Wednesday morning in early December, my laptop died. Just black. Right in the middle of a critical client project. A presentation that could land a huge long-term contract. Panic flared. The deadline was end of day, 6 hours. I needed access to my cloud files fast. Mason's laptop was in his home office. He'd always said, "Use it anytime. We don't have secrets. What's mine is yours." I grabbed it, logged in, and plunged back into work, racing the clock to finish. About an hour in, I needed our tax documents for a client reference. Mason handled our finances, kept everything organized on his laptop. I opened his file explorer, navigated to our shared documents folder. And that's when I saw it. Buried among work files, half hidden, a folder labeled, Personal Private. Those 2 words. Together. My stomach lurched. Mason and I had no secrets. Openness, honesty. That was our foundation. Or so I believed. Why, a private folder on a laptop he'd said was mine to use. My hands trembled. A small voice said, "Close it. Ask him later." Another, desperate voice hoped for something innocent. Surprise birthday plans maybe? But my finger moved, driven by an instinct I couldn't deny. I clicked it open. Hundreds of files. Photos. Screenshots. Spanning 3 years. My eyes darted, trying to process, to categorize, before the emotional tidal wave hit. Mason and Scarlett, leaning intimately across restaurant tables I didn't recognize. Candid shots of her laughing, truly joyful. Selfies of them, his arm around her, both smiling like they shared a precious, private secret. And screenshots. Dozens. Of their text messages. My hands had gone numb as I clicked the first one. Timestamp. 2 a.m. 6 months ago. Scarlett pouring out her heart about feeling lost in her marriage to Elijah, wondering about right choices, missing connection. Mason's equally long reply, validating her every feeling, sharing his own thoughts on paths not taken, on connections that transcend normal friendship boundaries. I opened another. A year ago. Late night. Scarlett couldn't sleep thinking of different versions of her life. Mason confessing his own what-ifs, his regrets he couldn't fully articulate to most people. My client deadline? Gone. Forgotten. I sat frozen, clicking, watching a hidden relationship unfold in excruciating detail. These weren't casual chats. These were emotional confessions. Intimate, late-night exchanges of deepest feelings, regrets, longings. Then I found the message. The one that would replay in my mind for months, burned there like acid on glass. 8 months ago, 2:17 a.m. Around the time Mason had started feeling distant. Scarlett's text read, "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that?" Mason's reply came just 3 minutes later. 3 minutes. He'd been awake, waiting for her, or thinking of her at 2 a.m. instead of me, his wife, asleep beside him. His response, "More than I probably should. But we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now." I read it 3 times. Praying the words would rearrange themselves into something innocent. Something explainable. But no. The meaning was devastatingly clear. My husband had feelings for Scarlett. Far beyond friendship. He was fantasizing about a life with her. And he valued their secret connection enough to nurture it for years. The timestamp was the final stab. 2:20 a.m. While I lay sleeping, dreaming, Mason was awake, engaging in deep emotional intimacy with another woman, discussing the romantic life they could have had. I couldn't stop now. Pandora's box was open and I needed to see everything, no matter the pain. I closed the screenshots and opened our joint credit card statements right there in his browser. I searched for patterns. For 2 years, every Tuesday afternoon, a charge from Riverbend Cafe. An upscale bistro downtown. Mason had never suggested we go there. The amounts? $50 to $70. A nice lunch for 2. Far more than he'd spend on a casual meal. Then his digital calendar. Synced across all his devices. There it was, clear as day. Every Tuesday at noon, a recurring appointment. Lunch meeting. No client name. No location. Just a vague 2-hour block. For years. I cross-referenced the Riverbend charges with the photos in his hidden folder. They matched. Perfectly. While I was at home eating leftovers at my desk, assuming my husband was grabbing a quick bite between meetings, he was having weekly secret lunch dates with Scarlett. 2 hours blocked off. Significant money spent. Maintained for years. This wasn't occasional friendly catch-ups. This was deliberate. Sustained. Carefully planned deception. Mason had built a parallel emotional life with Scarlett. Standing dates. Intimate late-night talks. Shared secrets. All while coming home to me pretending everything was normal. I sat at that desk for 2 hours. My client presentation? The deadline? Utterly forgotten. I devoured every screenshot. Documented every charge. Studied every photo, their body language, their smiles. Seeing everything I'd dismissed as paranoia before. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't misconstrued friendship. This was years of documented emotional intimacy. Financial proof of secret meetings. Photographic evidence of a relationship that obliterated every boundary of marriage. What hurt the most, what made my blood boil, was the chilling clarity of how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Every time I'd expressed discomfort about Scarlett, Mason had flipped it. I was the problem. Jealous. Insecure. He, the patient, reasonable partner trying to help his irrational wife. He'd made me doubt my own instincts, my own sanity, until I believed my discomfort was a personal failing. But my instincts, they had been screaming the truth the entire time. Every uneasy feeling, every flicker of suspicion, every moment I'd felt like the third wheel in my own marriage. It was all accurate. A reality Mason meticulously hid, gaslighting me into thinking I was just imagining things. Finally, I understood why he defended Scarlett so fiercely. Why her texts came before my words. Why he gave her our spare key without a word to me. Why he looked at me with disappointment whenever I suggested their friendship was unhealthy. Because to Mason I wasn't his priority. Scarlett was. I was the obligation. The legal wife he came home to out of commitment. Scarlett? She was the one he thought about in the morning. The one he carved out special time for, every single week. The one he shared his deepest feelings and regrets with. I was a stranger in my own life. The third wheel in my own marriage. And the undeniable proof was laid bare across his laptop screen. I sat there, staring at the evidence of his betrayal, as the afternoon light faded and shadows crept across the room. My client deadline? Hours passed. My phone buzzed with unread messages. None of it mattered. Only the wreckage of my marriage splayed across that screen. Eventually I forced myself to move. I found a USB drive and methodically copied everything. Every photo. Every late-night conversation. Every single credit card statement detailing their secret Tuesday lunches, spanning years. I organized it all, building a case like a lawyer preparing for trial. When I finished, I leaned back, waiting. I expected tears. Rage. The cinematic breakdown. Instead, I felt a strange, chilling calm. The kind that settles in after the shock has worn off, and you're left standing in ruins that simply cannot be rebuilt. There was almost relief in it. The quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing I hadn't been crazy. My instincts had been right all along. I glanced at the clock, 3:45 p.m. Mason would be home around 6:30, briefcase in hand, work-weary face, expecting dinner, expecting normal. I decided to give him exactly that. At first, I wanted to see if he could look me in the eye and pretend everything was fine, knowing what I knew. I went to the kitchen. Started preparing chicken with roasted vegetables, one of his favorites. I set the table with our everyday dishes, put on a playlist we both liked. An illusion of normalcy. Our apartment felt like a stage set. At 6:02 Mason walked in right on schedule. Tired. Tie loosened. Hair slightly messy, his towel for a tough day. He smiled, kissed my cheek like he'd done 1,000 times. Something smells good, he murmured, heading to change. Rough day with that client presentation? He called out. My laptop crashed this morning. I replied, my voice steady. He didn't know I'd spent the day uncovering his emotional affair. You could say that, I answered. I let him decompress for 15 minutes. Enough time to change, pour wine, settle onto the couch with his phone. I watched him scroll, probably texting Scarlett. Completely oblivious. What was coming next? Then I walked over. His laptop already opened to that hidden folder. Hundreds of incriminating files. I sat in the armchair across from him, the coffee table a barrier between us. I turned the screen. What is this? I asked, my voice flat. Mason looked up, confusion clouding his face. Recognition. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. No words came out. For 3 agonizing seconds, raw panic flashed across his features. Then it was gone. Replaced by something hard. Defensiveness snapped into place. You went through my private files? His voice, thick with indignation, rose. As if I was the one who had violated something sacred. Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right to snoop. The sheer audacity stunned me. He wasn't denying the contents. No apology. No explanation. His first gut reaction? To make me the villain. My laptop crashed. Work deadline, I said, keeping my voice steady. I needed tax documents. I found a folder labeled, private, containing evidence of a years-long emotional affair with Scarlett. So yes, I looked. Now explain it. He slammed his wine glass down. There's nothing to explain. You're misinterpreting a friendship. You've never been able to handle me being close to Scarlett. This is exactly the kind of jealous behavior I've been patient with for months. A cold knot formed in my chest. He was still going to gaslight me. With the evidence blazing on the screen between us. Mason, I pressed. I read the text messages. I saw the photos of your secret Tuesday lunches. I found the credit card charges from Riverbend Cafe, every single week for 2 years. This isn't me misinterpreting friendship. This is you having an emotional affair and lying about it. It's not an affair. He sprang up, pacing, his voice rising in that exasperated tone he used to explain the obvious. Scarlett and I are close friends. Since college. Yes, we talk about deep things. Yes, we meet for lunch regularly. That's what real friendship looks like, Arya. Deep connection, emotional honesty, mutual support. Just because you don't have friendships like that doesn't make ours inappropriate. Every sentence was a meticulously crafted deflection, twisting his betrayal into my inadequacy. I'd heard these tactics before, but never this raw, this blatant. Not with undeniable proof staring us both in the face. She texted you at 2 a.m., I said, my voice harder now, asking if you ever thought what life would have been like if you'd gotten together. You responded you thought about it more than you probably should. That's not friendship, Mason. That's emotional infidelity. He stopped pacing, whirling to face me. You're twisting things. Taking private conversations out of context. Building some narrative because you're insecure about my friendships. Scarlett and I talk about hypothetical scenarios sometimes. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. The argument raged for 2 hours. 2 agonizing hours. Mason deflecting, reframing every piece of evidence. He had an explanation for everything. Late-night texts? Just friends supporting each other. Secret lunches? Casual catch-ups he didn't mention because he knew I'd react badly. Intimate conversations? Normal for people with history. Every time I pushed back he countered, I was the problem. Too jealous. Too possessive. Too insecure to trust that men and women could be close without it being romantic. I was utterly exhausted. My head throbbed from defending reality against his twisted version of it. But I kept pushing. I needed him to acknowledge the truth. To stop lying. To take responsibility. That's when he delivered the death blow. The statement that would seal our marriage's fate. He stood in the middle of our living room, arms crossed, jaw set, a patronizing smirk on his face. That tone that said he was the adult, dealing with a difficult child. If anything, Arya, he sneered, you owe Scarlett an apology. The words hung heavy and sickening in the air. I stared, genuinely shocked, speechless. He warmed to his argument. She's been nothing but kind. She's tried to include you, tried to be friendly, and you've treated her with suspicion and coldness since day one. She knows you don't like her, Arya. She told me it hurts her feelings how you always try to limit our friendship. He was actually doing it. He was making his emotional affair partner the victim, and me the betrayed wife, the aggressor who needed to apologize. You want me to apologize to her? I heard my voice strangely calm despite the fury simmering inside. For what exactly? For noticing my husband was having an emotional affair? For being uncomfortable with inappropriate boundaries? For trusting my instincts when you've spent months trying to convince me they were wrong? His voice rose, sharp and condemning, for being jealous and possessive. For making Scarlett feel unwelcome and judged. She deserves an apology, Arya. And if you can't give her that, then I seriously need to reconsider this marriage. Absolute silence. Even the background music seemed to die. Mason stood, arms crossed, face set, basking in his perceived victory. He thought he'd called my bluff. Thought he was forcing me to choose between my pride and our marriage, forcing me to bend. He had no idea. In that silence something clicked. Clear. Absolutely certain. I looked at him. This man. Demanding I apologize to his affair partner for the crime of noticing. And then it hit me. He just handed me the perfect weapon. If Mason wanted an apology, he would get one. Just not the one he was expecting. I let the silence stretch, watching him gloat in his self-righteous certainty. Then my voice calmer than I felt. Fine. His expression flickered to surprise. He expected more argument. I'll apologize to Scarlett, I continued, utterly reasonable. But let's do it properly. At her house. With Elijah there too. If I'm apologizing for hurting her feelings, I want to do it right. In front of both our spouses. So everyone can hear what I have to say. Mason's face lit up. Relief. And something sickeningly like triumph. He smiled. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd broken me, cemented Scarlett's priority in his life. Really? You'll do that? His voice was eager, pleased. Absolutely, I said. Schedule it for this Saturday evening. Everyone there. I'll prepare what I want to say. He nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his phone to text Scarlett. I watched him type, watched his face relax for the first time all evening. And I felt nothing. Just cold, unwavering clarity. He had no idea what I was actually planning. No comprehension that he'd just arranged the perfect stage for me to detonate the truth. In front of everyone who needed to hear it. Mason spent the rest of that evening texting Scarlett, his face glowing with satisfaction. I watched him from across the room, this man convinced he'd won some significant victory. I felt nothing but cold determination settling deeper into my bones. The next morning, Thursday, I woke with absolute clarity. Mason left for work, kissing my forehead, reminding me to think about my apology. The moment his car left, I was back on his laptop. 3 hours. I methodically documented everything. Detailed screenshots, organized chronologically, showing the insidious progression. Early messages, friendly. Then a slow, creeping shift into something deeper, more intimate, crossing boundaries by increments. By the second year, Scarlett was texting him late at night about feeling disconnected from Elijah, missing emotional intimacy. Mason, validating her every feeling, sharing his own struggles. Pet names. You always know exactly what I need to hear. I don't know what I'd do without you. I organized it all year by year, month by month. A timeline that would be impossible to dismiss. Then the financial evidence. Our joint credit card statements. Every Tuesday lunch charge at Riverbend Cafe highlighted. Over $7,000 spent on secret lunches with another woman. While we were supposedly saving for a house down payment. And then something else made my stomach churn. Buried in his email. Receipts for gifts for Scarlett. A $250 designer silk scarf. A $180 bottle of expensive French wine. Flowers delivered to her office with a card reading, "Always knew you could do it. So proud of you." These weren't casual friend gestures. These were gifts for someone you were romantically entangled with. The card messages? Affectionate. Beyond professional. Beyond platonic. I printed everything. Digital backups in 3 cloud accounts. Copies on 2 USB drives hidden. I wasn't taking chances. By Thursday afternoon I had an airtight case. But I still had one more thing to do. Something that required a courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I needed to call Elijah Pierce. I stared at my phone for 10 minutes. Mason had Elijah's contact from all our forced double dates. I'd spoken to Elijah perhaps a dozen times. Quiet. Reserved. An observer. But I'd seen it in his eyes, especially lately. A resigned awareness. Like he knew more than he was saying. The same look I'd probably worn myself. My finger hovered over call. Part of me wondered if I was going too far. But the part of me that had been gaslit and manipulated for months knew. Elijah deserved a warning. He deserved to know his world was about to change. I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring. Professional. Puzzled. "This is Elijah." "Hi Elijah. It's Arya Montgomery. Mason's wife." Pause. "Arya? Is everything okay? I'm calling because Mason has arranged for me to come to your house on Saturday evening. To apologize to Scarlett. He insisted it happen in front of both of you. I wanted to make sure you'd be home." Another pause. Longer. I could almost hear him processing the layers. When he spoke his voice had changed. Alert. Focused. "I'll be there." No questions. No confusion. Just immediate understanding. "Thank you," I whispered. Then, needing him to grasp the full weight of it, I added, "I think there are some things you should know. Things that have been going on. Things you might have suspected but didn't have proof of." The silence on the line was heavy. Heavy with recognition. Finally, Elijah's voice, barely a whisper. "Thank you for calling me." 5 words. Carrying the weight of years of suspicion. Of being told he was paranoid. Of watching his wife's attention drift. "You deserve to know the truth," I said. "We both do." "I'll be there Saturday," he repeated. "And Arya, whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it." We hung up. I sat there feeling the monumental shift I'd set in motion. Elijah knew. He'd be ready. Mason came home that evening in an excellent mood. He'd had lunch with Scarlett that day. Their Tuesday date shifted to Thursday. He gushed about how grateful Scarlett was, how much this apology would mean, how it would strengthen all our relationships. I nodded, smiled, internally reviewing my evidence. Friday was more of the same. Mason coached me endlessly on what to say. Bullet points on his phone. Acknowledge my jealousy. Admit misinterpretation. Thank Scarlett for her patience. He even suggested an expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering. Really show her you're serious, he'd urged. I agreed to everything. Practiced humble facial expressions. Asked questions about tone and body language. He believed it. His confidence swelled. He trained his wife. He actually hugged me Friday evening. "I'm proud of you, Arya," he said, "for being mature enough to work through your issues." I hugged him back, feeling the unfamiliar weight of deliberate deception. I'd never been good at lying. But something had shifted since that hidden folder. I'd learned from the master. That night, I lay next to Mason, listening to his peaceful breathing. Unaware that tomorrow his carefully constructed world would detonate. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind circled. Was I vindictive? Was public humiliation the answer? Was I just hurt, lashing out? Did Elijah deserve this? But then the doubts would evaporate. I remembered Mason's face at our anniversary dinner. The patronizing looks. The gaslighting. The way he made me question my own sanity. I thought of all the women who stay silent, who apologize for being right, who shoulder blame for other people's betrayals. And I knew. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. Clarity. Truth-telling. When dawn finally broke, painting our walls gold, I rose with absolute certainty. No nerves. No second-guessing. I was ready to deliver the apology Mason had demanded. Just not the one he'd scripted. Saturday had arrived. And by evening, everyone would finally know the truth. Saturday arrived with clear skies, unseasonably warm. I moved through our apartment like someone preparing for battle. Mason, oblivious, thought my quiet focus was nervousness. He reassured me. Everything would be fine. Scarlett was looking forward to clearing the air. This would be a new beginning. I let him believe it. By 5 p.m. I was dressed in a simple navy dress, respectful, understated. Mason had chosen the expensive French wine. He wrapped it, placed it in a gift bag, treating it like a sacred peace offering. At 6:15, we left for the 25-minute drive to Scarlett and Elijah's. Mason insisted on taking his car, presenting a united front. He drove, one hand on the wheel, the other patting my knee. He talked the entire way about how meaningful this was, how proud he was of me, how our marriage would be stronger. I watched suburban streets, families out enjoying the evening. So normal. So ordinary. None of them knew that in one of those houses, lives were about to detonate. Mason kept glancing at me, hope mixed with nervousness. Did he wonder if I'd back out? Deviate from his script? I gave him nothing. My expression was neutral, perhaps slightly anxious, like anyone facing an uncomfortable conversation. I held the wine bag. I nodded. I smiled. I was the picture of a contrite wife ready to make amends. We pulled up to Scarlett and Elijah's at 6:40. Lights blazed inside. Through the window I saw Scarlett arranging something on their coffee table. Even from the car I knew she'd put in effort. Setting the stage for her validation, my public submission. Mason parked, turned off the engine. He turned to me, an expression of such genuine emotion, I almost felt sorry for him. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly. "This means everything to me, Arya. Everything. Our marriage is going to be so much stronger after tonight. You'll see." I looked at my husband. This man who had gaslit me, who demanded I apologize to his affair partner, who genuinely believed this would strengthen our marriage by cementing Scarlett's priority. "I know it will," I said, squeezing his hand. That was the last moment Mason would look at me with trust or affection. He just didn't know it yet. We walked to the door, Mason carrying the wine. He rang the bell. Scarlett opened it before the chime finished, her smile wide, barely concealing her smugness. Perfect, of course. Designer jeans, silk blouse, effortless elegance. Highlighted hair, flawless makeup. She dressed for the occasion, expecting to be photographed. "Mason, Arya, come in." Her voice was warm, welcoming. She truly seemed happy. She gestured us inside. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Clearing the air will be good for all of us." Mason handed her the wine. Scarlett made appreciative noises but set it aside without real interest. Her focus was on me, trying to gauge how thoroughly Mason had broken me. Elijah appeared from the kitchen. The moment our eyes met, I saw everything. Alert. Watchful. Braced for impact. None of that resigned exhaustion. He knew. And he was prepared for it to be uncomfortable. "Arya. Mason." He nodded. Then his eyes found mine again for a fraction of a second. Acknowledgement. Recognition. Maybe even gratitude. We moved into their living room, following an unspoken choreography. Scarlett and Elijah settled onto their gray sectional, close enough to appear united, but with a subtle space that spoke of distance. Mason and I took matching armchairs, the glass coffee table between us. It held wine glasses already poured, a cheeseboard artfully arranged. Scarlett had meticulously staged the scene. The room felt theatrical, brightly lit. Like we were actors given scripts. Except only I knew the real plot. Mason settled, giving me an encouraging nod. His face radiated barely contained excitement, relief. He thought he'd won. Scarlett folded her hands in her lap, gracious expectation etched on her face. Her posture perfect. Her expression carefully arranged into magnanimous forgiveness. She was ready to accept my apology, radiating generosity that would further elevate her in Mason's eyes. Elijah leaned back slightly, arms loosely crossed, watching. Focused intensity. He was the only one in the room besides me who knew something seismic was coming. I took a deliberate breath. Set my wine glass on the coffee table. The clink seemed unnaturally loud. I looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze. "Scarlett," I began, my voice calm, measured, giving nothing away. "I want to start by saying that Mason was absolutely right." I paused. Her smile widened. Validation. I do owe you an apology. Another pause. Her posture relaxed fractionally. Mason's face lit up with relief. Elijah's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. But not for the reasons you think. The atmosphere in that living room shifted so dramatically, I could almost feel the air pressure change. Mason's encouraging smile faltered, freezing on his face. Scarlett's expression transformed from gracious acceptance to cautious uncertainty. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his full attention locked on me now, every muscle in his body alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice, not raising my volume or changing my tone, just speaking truth with the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up years ago. I apologize for allowing you and Mason to continue an emotional affair right under my nose while convincing myself I was the crazy one for feeling uncomfortable. Mason tried to interrupt, his voice sharp with warning. Arya, what are you? I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence without even looking at him. My eyes stayed locked on Scarlett's face, watching her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. Let me finish. You demanded an apology. I'm giving you one. I turned my attention to Elijah, whose face had gone completely still. I pulled out my phone with hands that were steady despite everything, opened the folder I'd so carefully organized, and began speaking in that same measured tone. I apologized to Elijah actually because he deserved to know the truth about his wife long before tonight. For the past 3 years, Mason and Scarlett have been meeting every Tuesday for secret lunch dates at Riverbend Cafe. They've been having late-night text conversations about alternative life choices they wish they'd made together, about intimate regrets and emotional connections that cross every boundary a married person should respect. I handed my phone directly to Elijah, watching his face as he took it with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the first message, then scrolling to the next, then the next. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like he might be sick. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Mason was on his feet now, his voice rising with panic. Elijah, don't listen to this. She's taking things completely out of context. You know how Arya gets about my friendship with Scarlett. She's always been jealous and now she's trying to destroy. How long? Elijah's voice cut through Mason's explanation like a blade through paper. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. The coldness in those 2 words silenced everything else in the room. He was still looking at my phone, still scrolling through messages, but his question was directed at Scarlett with absolute precision. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear someone's watch ticking from across the coffee table. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed several times. Her perfectly composed expression had cracked completely now, tears forming in her carefully made-up eyes. She tried the reflexive denial first, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mason and I are just close friends. We've always been close. There's nothing physical between us. Nothing inappropriate has actually happened. Elijah finally looked up from my phone, and the expression on his face made even me take a step back. It wasn't rage exactly, though that was there. It was something colder and more devastating. Recognition. Vindication. Years of suppressed suspicion finally given permission to surface. I didn't ask if you slept with him, Elijah said, his voice still controlled but carrying an undercurrent of fury that was more frightening than shouting would have been. I asked how long you've been having an emotional affair with Mason while making me feel crazy for noticing. The parallel to my own experience was so perfect it felt orchestrated. We had both been living the same nightmare of gaslighting and manipulation, just from different angles and different marriages. Both told we were paranoid or insecure, or unable to handle mature adult friendships. Both made to feel like the problem while our spouses maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of us. Scarlett's carefully maintained facade shattered completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. Elijah, please. You're misunderstanding. We never meant for anything to. 3 years. Elijah's voice was flat. Reading from the timestamps on this phone, according to these messages, this has been going on for at least 3 years. 3 years of secret lunches. 3 years of late-night conversations about regretting your life choices. 3 years of you telling him things you never told me. He scrolled further, his jaw tightening as he read. Here's one from 8 months ago where Scarlett asks Mason if he ever thinks about what life would have been like if he'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And Mason responds that he thinks about it more than he probably should. Mason had found his voice again, but instead of apologizing or acknowledging the truth, he went straight into damage control mode. He was standing now, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation, pointing at me like I was the one who had committed some unforgivable betrayal. Arya, you're destroying everything. This isn't what I meant when I asked you to apologize. You twisted what I asked you to do. You've taken private conversations completely out of context, And you're using them as weapons to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with desperation as he tried to reframe the entire situation. Tried to make my truth-telling seem like manipulation or revenge rather than simple honesty. He turned to Elijah with his palms up in a placating gesture, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Look, Elijah, you have to understand. Scarlett and I have been close friends since college. We have history together. Yes, maybe we talk more than typical friends do. Maybe we're more emotionally connected than some people might think is appropriate, but nothing physical has ever happened between us. We've never crossed that line. Arya's jealousy has blown a close friendship completely out of proportion. But Elijah wasn't listening to Mason's revised narrative. He was still scrolling through my phone, reading message after message where Mason and Scarlett crossed boundaries that no amount of explanation could justify. His expression grew colder and more closed with each screen. It says here, "You bought her a designer scarf for her birthday," Elijah said quietly, reading from the email receipts I'd included. $250. And expensive wine for her promotion. Flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Scarlett. "You told me those flowers were from a grateful client." Scarlett's tears were flowing freely now. "Elijah, I can explain." "How much?" Elijah cut her off. "How much money has Mason spent on you over the past 3 years while telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget?" Mason's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart in real time. The evidence spoke louder than his deflections, and Elijah was clearly someone who trusted facts over explanations. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress and picking up my purse while Mason continued his desperate explanations to an audience that had stopped listening. The time had come for me to leave, to walk away from the explosion I'd detonated and let it burn through whatever was left. I looked at Mason directly, meeting his eyes for what would probably be the last time with any kind of intimacy or connection between us. "You demanded I apologize for speaking truth. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah. Done. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Mason, consider this my answer to that threat." Then I turned to Elijah, whose expression had shifted to something complex. Painful gratitude mixed with devastation. Anger at the betrayal mixed with relief at finally having proof that he wasn't crazy. "I've sent you copies of everything to your email address. All the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need to make informed decisions about your marriage. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Mason grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight enough to hurt. His fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. His voice had shifted from angry to pleading, taking on that desperate quality of someone watching their world collapse and scrambling for any handhold to stop the fall. "You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this, Arya, please. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down and be reasonable." I pulled my arm free with more force than I'd intended, leaving red marks where his fingers had been. I met his eyes one final time. "No, Mason, you need to talk to your lawyer because I'm done being the understanding wife in a 3-person marriage where I was always the least important person." I walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Scarlett sobbing, her careful composure completely destroyed. I could hear Elijah's cold questions continuing, his voice controlled, but carrying that undercurrent of fury. I could hear Mason's increasingly desperate attempts to explain, to justify, to somehow salvage something from the wreckage. But none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the cool October evening air and closed the door behind me, muffling the sounds of their imploding marriages. The suburban street was quiet, peaceful, even completely at odds with the devastation I'd just left behind. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called for a ride share, my fingers fumbling over the screen. The driver arrived within 10 minutes. I climbed into the back seat and gave him my address, then spent the entire 30-minute drive staring out the window at suburban streets passing by, houses with lights on and families inside. People living their normal Saturday evenings, completely unaware that in one similar-looking house, 4 lives had just detonated in ways that couldn't be put back together. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for the devastation I'd caused. I'd destroyed my own marriage, yes, but I'd also destroyed Scarlett and Elijah's. I'd humiliated Mason and Scarlett publicly. I'd handed Elijah information that would likely haunt him for years. But mostly I felt relieved. Like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me for so long. When the ride share dropped me off at our apartment building, I walked through the lobby and up to our floor feeling like I was moving through a different world than the one I'd left that morning. I unlocked our door and stepped inside. And immediately the space felt different, lighter, somehow less suffocating. Mason's things were everywhere. His jacket on the hook by the door. His shoes lined up near the entrance. His laptop still sitting on the desk where I'd discovered everything. But they all felt temporary now, like artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on our couch in the quiet apartment, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. I sat on that couch nursing my wine and waiting. Part of me wondered if Mason would come home at all that night, or if he'd stay at Scarlett's house, trying to salvage what remained of their fantasy relationship now that it had been exposed to harsh reality. But some deeper instinct told me he'd come back, if only to try one more time to control the narrative. His key turned in the lock at 1:47 a.m. I'd been watching the clock, noting each passing hour, existing in that strange suspended state between exhaustion and hyper-awareness. The door opened and Mason walked in, and the man who entered our apartment looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left it just 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen from what must have been crying, though I'd never seen Mason cry except at our wedding. His hair stood up in places where he'd clearly been running his hands through it repeatedly. His shirt was wrinkled and partially untucked. He looked like someone who'd aged a decade in an evening. He stood in the doorway staring at me for a long moment. Then he closed the door behind him with careful control and walked into the living room. The look on his face was something I'd never seen before. Equal parts devastation and fury. Grief and rage. All competing for dominance across his features. How could you do that? His voice came out raw, scraped clean of its usual confident tone. How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship? Share private conversations that you had no right to see in the first place. I took another sip of wine and said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Scarlett's house. Now it was Mason's turn to deal with consequences. He started pacing, his movements jerky and agitated. You violated my privacy. You went through my personal files, read my private messages, and then you weaponized them to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship. This was the anger phase. I recognized it from articles I'd read about how people respond to being caught in affairs. Deny. Deflect. Make the person who discovered the betrayal into the villain. I let him pace and rant for 20 minutes, cycling through accusations about my jealousy and insecurity and inability to trust. Then he shifted strategies, sitting down on the armchair across from me with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together in a posture that suggested vulnerability and remorse. Look, I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice softer now, more reasonable. Maybe Scarlett and I got too close. Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries. But we can work through this, Arya. We can go to couples therapy. I'll put distance between myself and Scarlett. Whatever you need. Our marriage is worth fighting for. This was the bargaining phase. Promising change. Offering concessions. Trying to negotiate a path forward that would minimize his losses. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. Mason, I'm filing for divorce. His face went through another rapid evolution of expressions. Shock first, as if he genuinely hadn't considered that possibility. Then calculation, probably running through options for damage control. Then manipulation, his features arranging themselves into wounded confusion. You're overreacting, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd come to know so well. You're emotional right now, understandably, but destroying our marriage over a friendship that you misinterpreted isn't the answer. You're letting your insecurities ruin something good. This is exactly what I was trying to help you work through. And there was. Even now. Even caught with irrefutable evidence of his emotional affair, Mason was trying to make this my failing, my insecurity, my misinterpretation, my inability to handle mature adult relationships. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word, closing and locking the door behind me. I heard Mason call after me, heard him try the door handle, heard him spend another hour pacing the living room. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard him finally settle on the couch, probably too exhausted to keep performing. The next morning he tried yet another approach. The wounded husband who just wanted to save his marriage. He called in sick to work and spent the entire day following me around our apartment, trying to initiate conversations about rebuilding trust and moving forward together. I was done. Done fighting, done explaining, done accepting blame for other people's betrayals. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I detonated our lives at Scarlett's house, I called Victoria Brennan. I'd gotten her name from a colleague who'd been through a similar situation and spoke highly of her strategic approach to difficult divorces. Victoria had a reputation for being thorough, uncompromising, and completely unsympathetic to spouses who tried to manipulate proceedings through gaslighting and blame shifting. Her office was downtown in one of those modern buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria herself was in her mid-50s, professionally dressed in a way that suggested she took her work seriously. She had sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct manner that I found immediately reassuring. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. I showed her everything. The screenshots organized chronologically, the credit card statements showing the pattern of secret lunches, the photos, the email receipts for gifts Mason had bought Scarlett. Victoria reviewed each piece of evidence with focused intensity, occasionally making notes on her tablet, asking clarifying questions about dates and context. When she finished reviewing everything, she sat back in her chair and gave me her assessment with the kind of straightforward honesty I desperately needed. Emotional affairs are harder to prove than physical ones in divorce proceedings, but the documentation you've compiled is exceptionally comprehensive. This shows a clear pattern of deception spanning years, financial evidence of resources being diverted outside the marriage, and communication that crosses appropriate boundaries. We can absolutely use this. She laid out her recommended strategy. File for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct based on emotional infidelity. Push for a favorable settlement given Mason's documented pattern of deception and the emotional harm it had caused. Be prepared for Mason to claim I'd violated his privacy by accessing his laptop, but counter that I discovered the evidence accidentally while using his computer for legitimate work purposes and that the content of what I found justified further investigation. He'll try to make you the villain, Victoria said with the confidence of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times. He'll claim you're jealous, vindictive, unable to handle his having friendships. He'll try to reframe his emotional affair as innocent closeness that you misinterpreted. Don't let him. The evidence speaks for itself. I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks after the explosive apology at Scarlett's house, I received an email that surprised me. The sender was Elijah Pierce and the subject line was simply, "Thank you." I opened it with curiosity mixed with apprehension. The message explained that Elijah had filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. Armed with the evidence I'd provided, he wrote about years of suspecting something was wrong, but convincing himself he was being paranoid, that Scarlett's friendship with Mason was innocent, even when his gut screamed otherwise. My apology had given him both validation and proof. The evidence I'd compiled had made it impossible for Scarlett to deny or minimize what had been happening. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime, carefully clarifying that it wasn't anything romantic or complicated. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be the third priority in your own marriage. To be gaslit into doubting your own perceptions while your spouse maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of you. I agreed to meet him, curious about this quiet man I'd barely known despite years of forced social gatherings. We met at a small cafe downtown on a Wednesday afternoon. Elijah looked different than I'd ever seen him. The resigned exhaustion that had always characterized his expression at parties was gone, replaced by something more solid and present. He looked like someone who'd finally stopped carrying a weight he'd been bearing for too long. Our conversation flowed easily in ways I hadn't expected. There was no need for pretense or performance. We'd both already seen each other at our worst moments, had both been publicly humiliated in the same living room, had both discovered that our instincts had been right all along. Elijah told me about years of watching Scarlett's face light up when Mason called or texted, about expressing discomfort with their friendship and being told he was too sensitive, too jealous, unable to handle mature adult relationships. About the slow erosion of trust that happens when someone constantly makes you doubt your own perceptions while maintaining that you're the one with the problem. It was like listening to my own experiences reflected back at me from a different angle. We'd been living parallel nightmares in our respective marriages, both manipulated and gaslit by people who claimed to love us while prioritizing their emotional affair. Through mutual friends and occasional social media observation over the following months, I learned that Mason and Scarlett tried to make a real relationship work after both divorces were set in motion. The predictability of it was almost funny. Once their connection was no longer forbidden or secret, once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of stolen emotional moments and late-night texts, the fantasy collapsed under the weight of mundane reality. They lasted exactly 4 months. Mutual friends reported growing tensions almost immediately. Scarlett apparently struggled with Mason's financial situation after divorce settlements left him stretched thin. Mason discovered that Scarlett's constant need for attention and validation, which had seemed endearing when directed at him from a distance through carefully curated messages, became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility to manage. The relationship that had seemed so special and deep when conducted through text messages and secret lunches turned out to be mostly illusion when forced into daily existence. They broke up quietly without the dramatic explosion that had marked the end of their marriages. Just a sad fizzle that proved what I'd suspected all along. What they had wasn't love or deep connection. It was the thrill of emotional affairs and the validation of being someone's secret priority. The knowledge that Mason and Scarlett's relationship had imploded so spectacularly after everything they'd risked gave me a strange sense of closure. Not satisfaction exactly, though there was an element of vindication, more like confirmation that my instincts had been correct all along. What they'd had wasn't the deep, transcendent connection Mason had defended so fiercely. It was fantasy and escapism dressed up as friendship, and it couldn't survive exposure to ordinary reality. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night at Scarlett's house, I sat in Victoria's downtown office signing the final divorce papers. The afternoon sun streamed through those floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished conference table where documents lay spread out in neat stacks. Victoria had negotiated a settlement that was more favorable than I'd expected. Mason agreed to split our savings evenly, let me keep the apartment since the lease was in my name alone, and even pay half my legal fees. Victoria suspected his unusual generosity stemmed from wanting to end proceedings quickly before more details of his relationship with Scarlett became public record. His colleagues and family were already asking uncomfortable questions about why his marriage had ended. Prolonging the divorce would only invite more scrutiny he couldn't afford. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Arya Montgomery. No hyphenated name, no legal ties to Mason remaining, except these final documents that would be filed away in some courthouse archive. Each signature felt like closing a door that I'd been trying to shut for months, but kept getting wedged open by Mason's attempts at reconciliation and manipulation. When I signed the last page, Victoria smiled and extended her hand. "Congratulations, you're officially divorced." I shook her hand, gathered my copies of the paperwork and walked out of her office, carrying a folder that officially ended one chapter of my life and began another. I'd expected this moment to feel heavier, sadder. I'd expected at least some echo of grief for the marriage I'd believed in, the future I'd planned, the love I'd thought we shared. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd finally removed a heavy winter coat I'd been wearing for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. The afternoon sun seemed brighter as I walked to my car, warmer on my skin, carrying the kind of promise that comes with genuine new beginnings. My weekly coffee meetings with Elijah had continued throughout the divorce proceedings. What started as mutual support between two people who'd survived similar betrayals gradually evolved into something more complicated and interesting. We met every Wednesday afternoon at the same downtown cafe, a small place with mismatched furniture and local artwork on the walls. At first, our conversations centered on processing the trauma we'd experienced. We compared notes on gaslighting tactics our spouses had used, traded stories about red flags we'd ignored, and found comfort in being understood by someone who'd lived through the same specific nightmare. But somewhere around the third month, I noticed our conversations shifting. We talked less about past pain and more about present lives and future possibilities. Elijah mentioned a promotion at his accounting firm that came with new responsibilities he found genuinely exciting. I talked about a freelance design client who gave me creative freedom I hadn't experienced in years, letting me experiment with concepts I'd been too cautious to try before. We discovered shared interests that had nothing to do with our failed marriages. We both loved old black and white films from the 40s and 50s, the kind with clever dialogue and cinematography that felt like art. We both preferred hiking trails that were slightly difficult to find, the ones that required research and effort, but rewarded you with solitude and views that more popular trails couldn't offer. We both appreciated quiet mornings where silence felt comfortable instead of awkward, where you didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. One Wednesday afternoon in early spring, Elijah suggested we meet for dinner instead of coffee. Something about the way he asked made it clear this was a different kind of invitation. A shift from friendly support to something more intentional. "There's a new Italian place that opened downtown," he said, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness I found endearing. "I thought maybe we could try it together if you're interested." I looked at this quiet man who'd survived the same betrayal I had, who understood without explanation what it felt like to be gaslit and manipulated by someone you trusted. We were both gun-shy about jumping into anything serious, both carrying damage that would take time to heal. But we'd built something honest between us over these months of Wednesday afternoon conversations. A foundation based on truth instead of illusion, on genuine understanding instead of fantasy. "I'd like that," I said. We took things slowly, both aware that trust rebuilds gradually after being thoroughly demolished. But the foundation felt different this time, solid in ways my marriage to Mason never had been. I ran into Mason unexpectedly on a Saturday afternoon about 8 months after our divorce was finalized. I was in the grocery store produce section, reaching for a bag of organic apples when another hand reached for the same bag at exactly the same moment. We both pulled back, started to apologize, then recognized each other. Mason looked different than the last time I'd seen him, older, somehow more worn. New lines had formed around his eyes and mouth, the kind that come from stress and difficult realizations rather than laughter. His hair had more gray in it. He'd lost weight, but not in a healthy way, more like he'd stopped caring about regular meals. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, both of us holding vegetables we no longer wanted. Neither sure what the protocol was for unexpected encounters with ex-spouses in produce sections. "Arya," he said finally. "How are you?" I kept my answers simple and honest. "I'm good. Working on some interesting design projects, enjoying the apartment, building a life that feels right." Mason nodded. Something that might have been genuine happiness crossing his face. "I'm glad you're doing well." He looked like he wanted to say something more significant, wrestling with words that wouldn't quite form. Finally, he spoke quietly, almost too soft for me to hear over the ambient grocery store noise. "I made mistakes, a lot of them. I handled our marriage poorly. I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth about my relationship with Scarlett." The apology was real. I could hear that. But it came far too late to change anything between us. Some things can't be unsaid. Some damage can't be undone. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. There was a pause. Then I asked because some part of me was curious about how their story ended. "How's Scarlett?" Mason's expression closed off immediately, his face shutting down in a way that told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. "We broke up months ago. Turns out what we had didn't translate well into an actual relationship. Once it wasn't secret anymore." He laughed without humor. "I'm living in a studio apartment across town, working through my own process of figuring out who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining." We parted cordially after that. Both of us aware that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. They can only be acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us into whoever we become next. Today, I live in an apartment that no longer carries any trace of Mason or our marriage. I redecorated completely after the divorce finalized, erasing visual reminders and replacing them with choices that reflect only my taste and preferences. The bookshelves hold novels I actually want to read rather than impressive titles Mason thought we should display. The walls feature artwork from local artists whose work speaks to me rather than pieces chosen to impress dinner guests. The furniture is arranged for my comfort and daily life rather than entertaining couples I never wanted to host. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. The sound of a life reclaimed, of boundaries respected, of truth spoken without apology. Elijah and I are still taking things slow. Still rebuilding trust that was demolished in our previous marriages. But what we're building feels different this time. Honest instead of performed. Based on respect instead of manipulation. Built between two people who understand the value of truth because we both paid the price for living in lies. I think about that night sometimes, that explosive apology that detonated multiple lives in Scarlett's carefully staged living room. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently, more privately, with less public devastation for everyone involved. But mostly I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly. They need to be witnessed by everyone who's been affected by the lies. Mason wanted me to kneel and apologize for hurting Scarlett's feelings. I gave him exactly what he demanded. I just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding. Never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth. Because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie. Mason learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow for truth. I weaponized it. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of peace that comes after you finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth. If this story of calculated truth and powerful revenge had you completely captivated, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Arya knelt down as if to deliver a humble apology, then revealed every hidden truth about Mason and Scarlett's emotional affair in front of both spouses. What was your favorite moment? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to know.